When they found the open graves, the entire town was thrown into a frenzy. That old cemetery had always been off limits, like a secret place nobody ever talked about, a place everyone avoided at all costs. But suddenly, people could not stop talking about it, and the site swarmed with onlookers, police officers, and even visitors from the capital. 7 graves were empty. Facebook did not exist yet, but photographs began circulating via email chains, and on a few local forums people used to stay informed. I had to keep my secret. Why get in trouble? Why stir up what I should not? But then one morning, while 2 police patrols stood permanent guard, they found something else, remains, and a strange rumor began to circulate about a corpse someone had left there. That was when my mother confronted me, telling me I had to reveal what I had witnessed a couple of weeks earlier. On that night, I snuck through the graveyard. For her, it was an easy demand. She only knew part of that terrible night's truth, the part I had chosen to share. This is the story of that cursed place, of that witch's graveyard. My dad had already been living in South Carolina in the United States for a year, where his brothers were, waiting for him for many years. He tried to stay in our town, in this country, with his tire shop, his vulcanizadora, if that is what you call it, there by the highway, until hardly anyone passed through here anymore. But he tried, I swear to you. He tried in so many ways, until truly, no customers came by. Days went by without a single client, and whenever he did get money from a simple repair, as soon as he received it, he had to go pay it at Doña Clarita's store, where she would always give him credit so that we could eat. She would do it with a sour face, but she always gave him credit. When he decided to go live on the other side, he went to promise that woman he would pay off his debts with his first paycheck, along with his brother's debts. Because my dad was always that way, the kind of person who would pay other people's debts. The night he left, I remember that I did not want to say goodbye. Deep down, I was very upset with him. I had gone on a trip with my middle school, and we got back at 5. My dad was waiting at home to leave, but I called from a friend's house to say we were running late, that we would arrive a couple of hours after that, and I did not get home until 8 o'clock, knowing my dad would not be able to wait for me that long, that by then he would have already left. Later I began to feel sad, remorseful for not being there to wish him a good trip, but I wanted him to know that, deep down, I did not agree. No one had asked either me or my sister about it. My sister was 10 years younger than I was, so they asked her even less. I missed him a lot, but I would forget about it when I was with my friends. My mom spent her time taking care of my sister, who back then had an illness that prevented her from walking much, so she depended on someone to assist her at all times. I would take care of her mainly in the morning, but at night, it was my mom's job. Listen, among all the things I will tell you, I ask that if you judge my immaturity, keep in mind that I was a grumpy teenager, and that I too find myself unbearable when I look back on those memories. It is a version of me that I am not proud of. Together with Cece, my best friend, we were always roaming around the whole town. She was very pretty, which made us extremely popular. I was popular by association, so we were invited everywhere. Everyone wanted to be our friend. Well, to be her friend and then mine by default. That is how we started hanging out a lot with Rodrigo and Fidel. Rodrigo was one of the most handsome guys I knew, and Fidel was without a doubt the funniest guy in town, although he was a bit overweight. I was surprised when I found out that they got closer to us because Rodrigo liked me. By association, without really meaning to, Cece ended up getting very attached to Fidel. She fell completely in love. We went everywhere with those two and their group of friends. Then they invited us to a party. The interesting part was that it was going to be on an abandoned ranch. People told a lot of stories about that place. They said its inhabitants had left one night, just like that, without warning anyone, without leaving a trace or any sign of where they had gone. Another version said that drug traffickers had taken them, that it was something like that. People around here say stuff like that when they want to feel safe, when they would rather think that if bad things happen to people, it must be because those people were no good, because surely they had debts or were involved in shady dealings. It is easier to believe that than to accept that we are all at risk when it comes to organized crime. The four of us went to the party, but the vibe was really heavy. The place already felt strange, as though something terrible had happened there. We also had the sense that someone, or something, was watching us at every moment, like there was something there. It felt like maybe that group of friends was not exactly the most trustworthy. We were not drinking, so I guess that is why we were the only ones who noticed. Everyone else seemed to be having a great time, so as soon as we could, we left. At that moment, I swear I attributed the strange vibe to the violence of the area, nothing paranormal. But let me clarify. Our town is known for three things, because everyone has been leaving over the years, because half of them end up involved with the drug trade, either by choice or by force, and the third, and maybe most important, because of our witches. However, these witches do not mix with us. They do not walk among normal people. Our witches live up in the mountains, in places that are very hard to get to. Not because there are no roads, but because only those they choose can find them. From time to time, you see fancy trucks with very important people heading up into the mountain and disappearing without leaving a single trace of where they went. The witches around here never let themselves be seen, to the point that, as you grow up, you might think they are just stories adults tell to scare us, until you grow older, until you finally understand. Back then, we understood nothing. After the party, it was still early, and we had asked for permission to come home pretty late. So someone suggested we go walking around the old cemetery, just to see what we might find, just to play. And obviously at that age it sounded very exciting. So we headed there, about 1.5 miles from the ranch. Rodrigo turned off the headlights long before we arrived and drove very slowly until we reached the gate, just in case someone else was wandering around out there so they would not see us arriving. But nobody went there anymore. That cemetery was older than the town itself. It filled up a long time ago, and the people who might have remembered those buried there had died long ago as well. There was no gate. We went in on foot, and while it felt strange to be there at night, the truth is that it was not as terrifying as we had imagined, until we saw her. A woman who did not notice us from about 40 yards away. Fidel got us all together and spoke to us very quietly. We walked a little to hide behind a tomb so we could watch her from there. "Hey, do you know who she is?" he asked us, knowing we had no answer. "You are seeing a witch from the mountains for the first time. My sister told me that sometimes they come down here for cemetery dirt, because they cannot use dirt from their own graveyard." "Their own graveyard?" I asked him. "Yeah, the witch's graveyard. Have you never gone up to the witch's graveyard?" Once again, we all looked at him, having no idea what he was talking about. "Oh, wow. So you do not know where they live, where they hang out, the stories people tell around here?" A little further on, about 1/2 mile away, there is this small graveyard with just a few tombs. Instead of crosses, they have satanic symbols. It is a witch's graveyard. They go there often to do their rituals because it is a very powerful place. Because it holds the spirits of those who have died. Their spirits stay there. But when they need cemetery dirt, meaning consecrated ground, they have to come here. They say sometimes they also take pieces of dead bodies when they need them. Cece started laughing, so we had to silence her so that woman, who was already moving away, would not hear us. But Cece was laughing at Fidel and his stories. She asked him how old he thought we were, to be out looking for witches. "Oh, you do not believe me? You think these are just stories? Fine then. Let us follow her. I'm telling you, I know where she is heading. Come on. You two stay in Rodrigo's car, keep it running, because I swear we are going to come back running." Cece agreed without thinking, but I said I was not about to wait in the car with Rodrigo. We were going too. I spoke for both of us, although by the look on his face I realized Rodrigo was pretty scared. After what happened, I know all of us would have preferred not to go. So quietly, without making any noise, we slipped out of that cemetery and started walking through the trees. There was no trail, and at times it felt like the brush and shrubs were closing in on us, forming a barrier so we could not pass, but we managed anyway. I do not know if we walked just those 500 yards Fidel mentioned. It felt like much more, but at the same time, when we looked back, far away, we could see the town lights so clearly. almost like we could shout or wave at them for help. That is how close they seemed. But it was just an effect caused by the thin mist starting to cover the area. Suddenly someone, maybe Rodrigo or Fidel, whispered that they saw silhouettes, shapes all in black that blended perfectly with the darkness, like camouflage. No campfire, no light, no candles, not a single light in that darkness that was devouring the night. It was so strange, like we had fallen under a trance that would not let us run, would not let us leave. And the silhouettes vanished in an instant, along with that chanting, as if they had never been there, as if they were just in our imaginations. We hurried away, almost convincing ourselves that indeed no one was there, but we were still terrified and mad at Fidel for bringing us. He defended himself, telling us that this was what happened for not believing him. When we got in the car, we noticed something. We were covered in dirt, as though it had crept up from our shoes to our legs, a yellowish dirt that smelled disgusting. We all went home afterward, not in the mood to do anything else. But I was the most affected. I felt awful. Suddenly I felt sick and asked them to drop me off first, even though Cece's house was closer. I started feeling like I was going to throw up. I got home and my mom was asleep in the living room with my little sister on top of her. For a moment, I got scared by the pile of fabric my mom used for her sewing work, an armful of black cloth that, when it piled up in the chair by the window, looked like the outline of a person. It terrified me when I would suddenly see it like that, and I never got used to it. I could not wake my mom to take my sister to bed like I usually did, because I felt so awful. I went to my room, and before I could even undress, I fell onto my bed, feeling like my head weighed a ton, like I could not even lift it. When I tried, everything spun. Looking back now as an adult, I can say it felt like I was very drunk, but without losing consciousness. Just the sensation, while my mind still functioned perfectly. The chanting we had heard in the witch's graveyard kept echoing in my head, like something was shouting it from inside me. I felt terrible. Suddenly, I felt a strong urge to vomit, and somehow I rolled off the bed so I would not throw up there. I threw up on the floor. It felt like it came all the way from deep in my stomach, but then I felt something stuck in my throat, something moving inside. It was a disgusting feeling, like having hair in my throat. I vomited again, and sure enough, it was a clump of black hair with pieces of dirt mixed in. I do not know how to explain how I felt in that moment, but something told me that hair belonged to a corpse. Even just writing this, I feel something in my throat again. I cleaned up around dawn when I woke up on the floor. Those chants were still pounding in my head, and all I could think about was that I had to go back, that I needed to return to the cemetery, that I had to take back that revolting clump of hair that had come out of me. I could not stop thinking about it all night. Finally, the morning came and I decided to do it. My mom told me early that she was going to deliver some orders and was leaving me to look after my sister, so I immediately bundled my sister up, called Rodrigo, and asked him to come pick us up and drive us back to the cemetery. I had no real reason to explain why I had to do it, but he also felt ill for some reason. He did not find it incredible or crazy for me to ask. 15 minutes later, he was outside my house and it had already started to rain. When we arrived at the entrance to the old cemetery, the rain was almost done. I told my sister to wait in the car, that we would not be long. Rodrigo and I started walking inside. When we got through it and were about to go into the woods, Rodrigo told me he did not want to go all the way to the witch's graveyard, and I actually thought it was better that he wait halfway, where he could still hear if something happened at the car in case my sister needed help. So I told him that was fine, and I kept walking up alone. I did not know what I was going to find. I was expecting the worst. Yet nothing could have prepared me for what I actually saw when I reached that place from the night before, where those shapes had been. As I got closer this time, I could feel the voices in my head going silent. I recognized the place. I could see the graves, just a few, maybe around 20. They looked like they were decades or centuries old. Instead of crosses like in the old cemetery, they had wooden symbols. I remembered where we had seen the figures standing the previous night. As I approached the first few graves upon entering, I realized something. The silhouettes seemed to have been standing on what I could now confirm were open graves, recently dug up in the mud. The worst part was that inside, I could see pieces of wood from coffins, clothing. When I leaned closer to see better, among the mud-soaked garments I noticed something. A lock of hair that reminded me of what I had vomited just hours before. The same kind I was carrying in a bag to leave there. I felt that same horrible sensation in my throat, but this time I could not throw up. I felt like I was choking. My knees buckled, and I felt someone catch me. It was Rodrigo, who had followed me up. I hugged him, thanked him for being there, and asked him why he had come. He said he heard me calling him. I was grateful, but I told him I had not called out to him. Then it dawned on me that my sister was alone in the car, defenseless, far from us. While we ran back, the rain picked up again. The path became almost impossible, and we had to hold onto the trees so we would not slip. It felt like my chest was going to explode. I felt a gnawing urge to get back to my sister, like something was chewing me up inside. I left Rodrigo behind and ran, falling, getting up, completely covered in that yellowish mud. At last, I saw the car off in the distance, and relief washed over me when I saw my sister waiting there calmly. But she told me that some people had just passed by, that they stopped at the car, that they said something to her. It did not seem strange to her, but it did to me. Nobody around town ever went near that path that only led to the cemetery, which ended right there. Nobody had a reason to go out that way, especially not in weather like this. There were no houses nearby, and the road did not go anywhere else. I told my sister they were probably neighbors just so she would not worry. At that moment, Rodrigo came up and asked me to clean myself off well before getting in the car. That was when I noticed that I was again covered in that yellowish dirt, but the voices had gone silent. We went back home with a strange sense of calm, me, Rodrigo, and my sister. The voices were gone, and for several days, it seemed like everything was just a bad memory, like maybe it had all been blown out of proportion. A few nights later, I woke up to a noise outside the house. My mom was not there. She was staying with her godmother, like she did every 2 weeks to care for her. Without much suspicion, because it often turned out to be animals making those kinds of sounds. I looked out the window. I saw a dark figure move quickly in the darkness, very nimbly, like a cat, but the size of a person, crawling. I looked closely, but saw nothing. I was about to go back to sleep when I heard my sister's bedroom door open, and then I heard her slow, painful steps coming down the hallway toward my room. I got up to help her and asked why she was up. "There are people outside," she said. "Ladies?" I asked, very confused, "What ladies?" "There are some ladies outside, come sleep with me." I got up with her and went to the window just to check. Although I was almost certain we would not see anything, I knew I would not be able to sleep otherwise, wondering who was out there. I walked slowly out of my room, determined to check things out. While I was making sure the back door was secured, I looked outside. 2 figures were standing in the darkness, 2 figures that I recognized, that looked exactly the same as what we had seen days before in the witch's graveyard. They were there. I felt it in my heart that they had followed me, that they were outside my house. But they did not do anything. They did not come closer. They did not disappear the whole time I stayed there staring at them. I went to bed with my sister and I tried to think of something else. I thought of my dad, how I missed him. That was the only way to overcome the terror that was gripping me, so I could sleep. But it was not going to stop. The next night, and the night after that, and the night after that, they came back. At least on the following nights, my mom was home, but I was still terrified and could not bring myself to tell her about it. I knew her personality well enough to know that she would go outside, yelling at whoever it was, demanding they leave, thinking they were just trespassers, never suspecting anything more sinister. I felt it in my bones that it was dangerous, that these were matters of life and death. So I kept those nightly visits to myself. I only told her that I had seen something strange one time when I cut through the cemetery at night. I kept hidden from her the figures that walked around our house. that watched us through the window when we were not looking, that twice came up to my door to see if it was unlocked, to see if I was asleep. Out of a sense of protection, I stayed quiet. What I did do was start sleeping in my sister's room every night. At least she could sleep. I would wake up twice a night, sometimes more, dying of thirst, so I would go to drink a glass of water. But on one of those nights, after setting my glass down, I realized the back door had opened, as though the wind had forced open the locks. I rushed to close it, but then I noticed something on the floor right by the door. Footprints. Yellowish footprints of bare feet, going all the way down the hallway to my room. One door shy of my sister's room where she was sleeping. That door was open, even though I had left it closed like always. All I could do was walk straight to my sister's room, even though I had to pass by that open door. I stepped in front of it quietly, looking in without really wanting to see anything, terrified of finding something there. Luckily, there was nothing. But before I entered my sister's room, I heard a noise from the living room. I took a few steps so I could see in there. I saw someone sitting in the darkness. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. But before I ran, I looked carefully. It was that stupid pile of my mom's fabric again, as always, shaped like a person in the chair. I sighed in relief, still trembling, and I felt a little silly. I turned to go back to my sister's room, but something made me look over my shoulder again. The figure in the chair was not the pile of fabric. It was something else. An awful-looking woman, bald and hairless, with her back to me, twisting her body in an inhuman way to stare directly at me. She was already inside. At that very moment, I realized the nightmare was only just beginning. That night, it dawned on me that whatever had entered my home was merely the start of a nameless terror, an eerie presence that would not fade at daybreak. From that moment on, my life, and my family's, would never be the same.